Hi, everyone. My name is Mallory Treadway, and I am the marketing coordinator here at Keller Schrader. Today, it's my pleasure to introduce Josh Pack, who is a practice leader for strategic management and data science. Today, Josh will be discussing phases 4 and 5 in the How to Get Better at Corporate Analytics series. If you haven't heard his talks on the rest of the phases, I highly recommend checking them out. You can find them on our website and on our YouTube page. Welcome, Josh.
All right. Thank you, Mallory. Yeah, I appreciate it. I'm excited to be wrapping the entire framework today. We'll do an overview as a recap and then also kind of explain some of the nitty gritty of phases 4 and 5 today. So thanks everyone for those of you that have listened to all of these. And if you haven't, we encourage you to go back and check out the early ones, just like Mallory was saying. So today we're talking about the implementation and execution phases. And just to give you a review here, the phases of the data strategy framework here at Keller Schrader are exploratory, investment, architecture, procurement, implementation, and execution. Let's just kind of do a quick review of some of these earlier steps to frame up the conversation. So, in the exploratory phase, recall that this is really about self education, getting a sense of kind of where you are in your current maturity, learning about where some others are in your industries and other industries. And then you develop a simple strategic position paper to show to your executive sponsors, and then you get their approval to proceed to developing a business case for investment in data capabilities. So the outcome from this is a defined data strategy and approval to proceed. Then in the investment phase, rather than showing the steps, I just want to show the main themes here. The whole idea is that you want to develop a self-funding business case and get approved funding to launch a data strategy capability in your organization. And this really rests on the back of being able to identify, or as we say, surface analytics use cases, monetize them, meaning identify the ROI and execute on the ROI, and then manage them as an investment portfolio, just like an investment manager would do. In the architecture phase, this is about not only architecting the technical platform design, but also architecting your team and architecting how the organization is going to embrace everything that you're about to bring to the table. So here you want to build the team, keeping in mind that you want to be looking not for the most available people, but for the best people, and the chemistry among those people is important. You're going to then specify and design the defined environments for the platform. You're going to define how you will actually execute on your use cases and begin to explain that to sponsors and stakeholders. And then you're going to develop the architectural specifications for the platform, for your org, and for other needs that you may have. Ultimately, the output from this is implementation requirements. Next, you're going to procure all of that. And so in this phase, now that you've specified everything, you're going to work very closely and work by the book with your internal procurement team, your legal team, and especially your cybersecurity team. Some things to remember here are that often these technologies may involve open source licensing, which is not always comfortable for security teams or for legal teams. And so you need to do a really thorough job kind of bringing them along, helping them to understand the state of the state, and then answering their questions confidently and with good information. And you may even need to be involved in kind of reviewing contracts, educating the attorneys on terms, and then working very closely with your cyber team so that they actually feel like part of the development of this in cohort with you rather than being brought in at the end and being the naysayers. So treat those groups as part of your team. And ultimately, the outcome from this is you have executed contracts and you're set up to begin the procurement of the technologies and services. So that's where we've been. Today, we're going to launch into implementation and then execution. So, in the implementation phase, the steps are now that you've got all this technology, you're going to actually install it. Some of the installation may have occurred in your original pilot project, but that may have just been temporary licensing, temporary environments or servers or what have you. So now you're really going to put it in the footprint that it belongs, whether that's on-prem or cloud. And then, once you've got all that sort of effectively installed, you're now going to test it out with proof of concepts. Now, these proof of concepts are a little bit different than pilot. So here you're actually looking for business value. So the pilot was to demonstrate some capabilities and that there's the potential for actually doing this inside your organization. Here you're proving out the business value. And so we split this into three steps: the data engineering, the data science, and the solution implementation, in order to really call out the importance of what we'll say is the back end as well as the front end that the sponsors are going to care about. So data engineering, we all know that the biggest chunk of the work is in procuring the data, managing the data, integrating the data, and caring for the data quality, the data governance, all those things. And so to the degree that you've installed those platforms as part of your foundation, you want to design a POC and select a POC that not only has business value and pays for itself, but then also is illustrating, the use of all the platform that you've bought. Next is the data science concept, which of course is a dovetail from the data engineering. The data science proof of concept is really where you're going to illustrate, not only are we just doing sort of backward looking spreadsheeting now, but we're also using a little bit more sophisticated tools that we've just invested in, and those are going to support the, discovery of new insights that create new monetized business value that hasn't been done before. And then ultimately, you want a proof of concept to be able to be implementable as a deployed solution. And that may mean sort of an ad hoc data product for a small set of users. It may mean a bolt-on API to a model that's going to be called by some other application or what have you. But regardless, you want these to be real, right? You want them to show business value and illustrate the capabilities. And so then the outcome from this is that you have validated your implementation, both in terms of technology and business value. So that's implementation as an overview. Now, let's talk about for just a moment, what is it that we're implementing, right? I mean, if you've been with me throughout the series, it's been a span of time. So I've shown a few different diagrams and concepts, but it might be good just to kind of revisit the whole theme. This is a fresh diagram you may not have seen, but it kind of encapsulates everything that we're trying to get implemented here. So if you think about it, what we're doing is drawing data from applications and databases across your enterprise. And this doesn't show it, but you could even have external third-party data or data from customers or suppliers. But ultimately, you want to be bringing that into an integration platform of some kind, whether that's kind of job to job ETL or more integrated enterprise service bus. Those are all terms that we haven't maybe delved into thoroughly, but integration is essentially bringing together the data for the purpose of analytics or downstream use in other applications to create value. So then, why are we doing this? Well, it's really all about the learning. So you want to harvest, study, and learn. Harvest the data that you have available to you in your ecosystem. You're going to study it in some way, whether that's traditional BI or reporting or data science. And then you're going to learn from that. And that learning loop creates the monetized value for your company if you've prepared your use case portfolio well and selected the high ranking projects from that. So down in the lower left and right of this diagram, you can see that we've kind of separated out the BI platform from the data science platform. So BI is going to be your dashboarding or other kind of reporting mechanisms that are hitting data warehouses per se. So this might be Power BI or Tableau or what have you. Again, we're tool agnostic here at Keller Schrader, but this is going to allow you to do things like looking in the rear view mirror, maybe doing a little bit of forecasting and with simple math. But essentially, these are management reports, right, in dashboard form that's convenient to consume. Maybe the managers using these can interrogate the data a little bit, but effectively, this is the data that you already have. Contrast that with data science on the right. We are actually using new tools and new techniques and algorithms and kind of advanced math skill in order to actually prescribe or predict or assess or forecast in a way that you can't just by crunching pivot tables and spreadsheets. So here's where you're going to try to predict demand attrition or where are we going to run up against production capacity constraints, or how can we route our trucks better, or what kind of failure analysis can we do and optimize supply chain and all these kinds of things. And there are plenty of others depending on your industry and use case. These examples here tend to be kind of either utility or manufacturing centric. But if you're a financial services firm or a retail firm or whatever, you could have a different list underneath these. But really, the point here is not so much the use cases as to say that this structure of this platform is what you're shooting for, right? And this is sort of pseudo technical, but really more of a business concept in order to solidify that in your mind. So, with all of that, the key themes of what you're implementing are having a data exchange to integrate data, really the ability and the enablement to, uh, exercise data lifecycle management practices. So that's to say that you're going to curate data, you're going to understand the meaning of the data fields, the data elements. You're going to be exercising, hopefully, data quality practices, and all of those to like increase the confidence in the data itself and therefore the work that you're doing. And then with all of that, again, harvest, study, and learn from the data to create business value that wasn't possible before. And in doing all of this, not only do you hopefully gain new insights, but you're also reducing the time to value because you've invested in this platform. You're actually improving productivity, efficiency, accuracy of the decisions that you're making, therefore reducing cost and increasing revenue. And then, enable strategic learning in the sense that, you're going to be actually getting ahead of your competition by leveraging, more sophisticated mathematical techniques, maybe getting insights that your customers simply don't have the capability to gain. So these are some of the big themes about what it is that you're implementing. So just wanted to pause on that. So happy to hear from you sometime after this recorded webinar if you'd like to discuss any of these further. So some tips here as you're doing this. Very important to involve and inform the key technology support stakeholders. This is a way of saying all the other groups in IT. As you implement the platform for the first time, you're probably going to discover upstream and downstream linkages to other aspects of the enterprise architecture that you maybe hadn't even anticipated. So what do I mean by that? Well, if people start to use your tools and they discover there's something wrong with their systems, that's going to affect the applications group that's responsible for those other systems. Or, perhaps you learn something about operations that then triggers the need for further investment in maybe like a transactional system because now you've piqued the curiosity and the hunger for more information for better insights. And then, strictly speaking, there may be just sort of technical dependencies upstream and downstream, just from the fact of actually having your systems in place that then requires more technical support. So just be ready for all of that. Next, you want to be able to validate the capabilities with well-selected POCs. That's simply to say that make sure that you have identified the POCs that have business value, but also exercise the capabilities. We've already covered that, but it's worth repeating. Be ready for things to go wrong. I mean, even though you've done your pilot and you've worked with all these third parties to, kind of create the ideal platform, if you will, you're still doing this for the first time. So make sure that you're managing the expectations of the sponsors and stakeholders, and make sure that you leave enough bandwidth on your team and the other technical stakeholders that you'll be able to recover from any things that go wrong, whether that's in development or production or what have you. Again, update your sponsors frequently on the proof of concept projects. You don't want to leave them in the lurch, wondering what's going on, because the mind can always wander in absence of actual information, and then rumors can begin and so on and so forth. So make sure that you're ahead of that and kind of controlling the messaging. And then along those lines, evangelize, even for folks that are not direct beneficiaries of this work. If the word starts to get out, if you control your messaging, if you're doing good stuff, there's going to be others who are big proponents of analytics and data that are going to want a piece of this. So make sure that you're spreading the gospel of the data capabilities that you're about to build. Next, be sure to educate the stakeholders on the different aspects of these POCs, right? And projects into the future, because there's a difference between a data engineering effort and a data science effort, and then actually deploying a solution. Certain use cases may not even get deployed into a production environment. They may simply be like a one-time study, a desk study that you may not have been able to do before, but it still ends up as a report on the desk of a decision maker rather than actually being implemented into an architecture somewhere. Because really, the business value isn't necessarily driven by how many tools and toys you are touching, right? So it may be that you have procured data on engineering and do data science, but you don't actually do a deployment. Or you might do a data engineering project, which improves the quality of the data and in and of itself creates value without even doing any fancy data science. So make sure that your stakeholders understand the distinctions here and that each one can have its own value. And then ultimately, when you've gotten through your selected POCs, make sure that you declare completion of implementation, which will then kind of open the floodgates to new opportunities, new projects in the ongoing execution phase. And along those same lines, be ready to hit the ground running. So when you're done with implementation, be ready to just go. There probably won't be a big pause there because by this time, if you've done things well and if you've got good sponsorship, like we've talked about in earlier sessions, you should be able to really get moving on the next items in your use case portfolio. Next is execution. Won't spend quite as much time on this. This is sort of commonsensical, but is difficult to do well. So we've talked about use case development in earlier discussions where you're really kind of surfacing possibilities with different stakeholder groups, but then you execute the use cases on the new platform that you have. And these last three phases are really important. They're sort of non-technical in a sense, but again, this is all about doing good regular status updates. And then as the projects are implemented and begin to actually reap the rewards, you want to make sure that you're capturing that in what we call a benefits realization framework. And this can take on a lot of different forms, but it's essentially doing the accounting of taking credit for whatever value these use cases are creating. And you're probably going to have to share that credit with the other stakeholder groups that you're working with. But ultimately, you want to be able to show that the benefits you're creating more than justify the cost of creating the group and implementing the platform. And really, all of that leads to this theme that we've talked about before, which is use case portfolio management. And so, in a very real way, the use case portfolio, which in the initial phases of setting all this up, kind of acts as a list of ideas. Ultimately, you're going to be using it to show the return on the investments that you make, which ultimately points to ongoing kind of perpetual business value. So those are the steps of execution and some key points here. Focus on use cases that drive business value aligned to corporate strategies. That's really critical. You might be able to identify projects that have good ROI, but if they're kind of in a different direction than some of the key formal strategies that have been declared by the top, then that may not actually get you where you want to go. Make sure that you're moving in the direction of the corporate plan, both short-term and long-term. Involve key stakeholders. Again, we've said this a few times, bring them along. And here it's so that they don't call into question, your reputation or the work that you're doing. Okay, so if you keep them involved and you seem less like a clandestine, newly formed group, but rather part of the culture, it's really going to be good for everyone. So make sure you include others. This is not a something that's supposed to be hidden in the shadows, right? Analytics is really to serve the organization. This is really important. So don't go advertising your conclusions from statistical modeling immediately. Run it by the subject matter experts that are close to the business and understand the process and the nuances and caveats of what's really happening. Okay, so the worst thing you could do is to hire a bunch of junior data scientists who then create some conclusions that run up against the conventional wisdom of a 30-year veteran, right? Even if you're right, it creates a lot of bad will, right? So you want to involve those subject matter experts. And really, decision making, if you think about it, is not an automatic slam dunk from a statistical model. It's always going to be made by a human, right? With some exceptions, of course. But be sure that you are involving others. And then build trust with the people who own the data and build trust with the groups that are impacted by whatever change your analytics efforts may bring. In previous sessions and in general, we always like to say that analytics is change management by its very nature, because when you create these new insights, if you're actually going to act upon them, it usually requires human behavior change. And so building this trust with the owners, um, is a way of kind of managing whatever potential resistance there is. And then also, creating the relationships with your data owners is good from the get-go, because without fail, you're going to find some kind of data error. There's going to be some kind of phenomenon in your systems that's been happening for years or decades, that by the very nature of looking at the data and studying it with more rigor than before, you're probably going to find something that wasn't even known, which now needs to be improved. So you don't want to surprise these data owners. You want them to realize that you may be creating value just by improving the quality of the data. So we've said this a few times as well. Critical to be able to demonstrate the ROI for each use case by tracking the benefits and then tying those benefits right back to the line items on your use case portfolio. So your use case portfolio ultimately becomes the proof in the pudding of an investment portfolio. And you want to be able to advertise that to the sponsors that paid for this in the first place. It's implicit throughout, but make sure that you are striving to become self-funding through the value you create. Even if you cannot directly tie the benefits back to your own departmental budget, make sure that you're tracking those benefits across whatever departments get to reap the rewards, so that you can show that, broadly speaking, your group is paying for itself and for the investment in the platform. So really, that's it. This is a little bit shorter than some of the previous sessions, but I wanted to be sure to kind of recap the entire framework for you, with the key inputs, outputs, and considerations for exploratory investment, architecture, and procurement, and then go a little bit deeper into implementation and execution. So really, we've reached the end of this series. Really grateful to those of you who have kind of faithfully tuned in. Again, for those of you that are new and are listening to this for the first time today, we do have all the other webinars recorded. And of course, we've got a variety of resources to kind of talk about this, the different angles and aspects and phases. And what I want to say in parting here is that, regardless of where you are in your maturity curve, um, this data strategy framework can fit pretty much any kind of organization. We've applied it to organizations that are really kind of trying to move from spreadsheets to dashboards. And we've applied it to much more mature organizations that already have a lot of the capabilities we've talked about here, but are just having trouble kind of identifying and articulating the business value to guide them towards profitable execution. So it really does, we've seen in our client work, it really does apply to everyone. You just got to have the will to learn about it, and we're happy to help you do that. So with that, thank you so much and happy holidays. I've really enjoyed recording all these sessions and also the live sessions. So please reach out to us. I'm Josh. There are several others aside from me who can speak to all of this, and we'd love to have that conversation with you sometime in the new year. So thank you very much again.